Something that we can do is to examine the status of our repository. This helps us to see what we have pending to do. In order to do that, we can issue the command git status, enter. And we're going to see that we are on the master branch. There are no commits yet, and there is nothing to commit. But what is that about commits? Remember that Git is a version control system, right? So we want to track changes of the content of files. When we talk about a commit, that means that we haven't commit a change or we haven't stored a change in the Git repository. That is, if I change a file and then I want to persist that change into the repository forever, we call that commit. Since we haven't stored anything in the repository yet, then we have no commits. And since we haven't done any changes to any file of our project, then there is nothing to commit. And as you can see, it says here that we should create or copy files and use git add to track those files. Interesting. But before that, let's talk more about the kind of changes that we can store in the repository. For example, I can create a new file and then I can save that into the repository, which means that anyone that clones the repository later in the future will be able to get that file. After that, I can modify that file and then commit that change, and then that change will be able to be seen by anyone who clones the repository after that. Also, we could delete that file and then commit that change, which means that if somebody clones that repository, then by default, they will not be able to see that file because in the current version of the repository, that file doesn't exist, but it exists in the history of changes. Somebody that has access to the full history of changes is able to quote-unquote travel to the past, see the history of changes, and see that file. See when it was created, when it was modified, and then when it was deleted. And they can access all of the content of the files that were committed at any time. So this is what we talk about when we're talking about commit. We're talking about storing the changes that we have done to the files of our project. Alright, so let's put it to test. Let's come here, and I want to create a new file. So I will right click on here, new text document. I'll call it text, enter, and I will press enter. In my case, I like to use Sublime. As you can see here, I have Sublime. You can use whatever text editor you want. If you're using Windows, you can even use Notepad or Visual Studio Code, whatever is fine. So open the file, and right here, this is test content dot. Save, and now let's come back here, and let me say here, git status one more time. And let's see that now. Yes, it says that there are no commits yet, but it also says that there are on-track files. Oh, that's interesting. On-track files means that Git is able to detect that we have files in our directory in this place, but that those files are not being tracked by Git. Now, of course, you may not want to track each and every file that exists in the directory in which the repository is in. So, Git is only letting you know that this file exists and it is not being tracked, and if you want to track it, you should use git add. So let's see how to track this file using git add.